The War Within is less than a week away, so I wanted to do a final beta tank tier list, and we're going to break it down by their hero talents as opposed to just a tank as a whole, because some hero talents are better than others, some seem to get more play, some are just really strong in comparison to the other. So I wanted to go through them by hero talents. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to rank them on a couple different things. It's going to be a little bit more unique to me. I did do some research and looked into what some other people were feeling about these tanks, so that's going to weigh into it as well, as kind of like what the community thinks of these tanks. And I want to try to do this for like a average to above average player, but not necessarily to a top tier, like a 1%er, because they're going to play the game very differently and might have some different takes on certain things. So I want to try to keep this for like the average, 10 pusher, and just kind of do a rating on that system. So I do have a little list of notes here. Let me get this up, and let's start off with Warrior, which Warrior has actually seen a lot of love recently. They were really solid. If you go back to my first tank video, I talk about they were my honorable mention because they felt really strong. They felt like a brick wall that you could just jump into any situation. As long as you had shield block going, you were just solid. Like, you were healer reliant, but you didn't need a lot of healing. So changes from Dragonflight to the beginning of beta to now, not much has changed. They did reduce some rage generation, but Mountain Thane specifically balances that out a lot. You get a lot of rage regen from that hero talent. They take very little damage, and like I said, they're healer reliant, but minimally. You do need one to stay alive. Like, you won't last long without one, but you block out so much damage. You stop so much damage that you just don't need a lot of healing, but you do need healing. Also, Revenge is really strong right now, but you kind of need to weave that in properly. So it's a really strong ability that you don't use often, which is why I think they can keep it as strong as it is. And Warriors do really well with their execute. Executes are really great. All right, so let's do Colossus first. So Colossus has Demolish, which is that 1 minute cooldown that gets reduced as you spend energy or spend rage. And it is a huge damage cooldown. It also reduces damage taken while you're channeling it. It's not a very long channel, but it is a nice reduction in damage, and you also can still block, you can shield block, you can do all these different things with it. So it doesn't make you just like a vulnerable, meat shield while you're casting it. And it does, like I said, big damage to your target, to your prio target, as well as targets around it. And it also gives them a 20% damage taken buff. So it does increase a lot of the damage that Colossus is putting out. They do have a size increase, which I think is really cool. It is worse than Mountain Thane as far as rage generation. It's, you do kind of dry out a little bit. Mountain Thane tends to put you up a little bit faster with these big burst windows of rage. And it wants to use Revenge, which, like I said, isn't always viable in big packs. You're kind of dumping with Ignore Pain and maybe some shield blocks and not thunderclaps, but shield blocks, and Ignore Pain is kind of like what you're dumping into, more so Ignore Pain. But when you can Revenge, it's very strong. Another thing that's kind of a downside to them is they're not as fluid as Mountain Thane. It's a little bit clunkier, and I think that's due to the rage generation being a little lower. It would probably thrive in like Dragonflight version, because you did have all that rage gen. But right now, it's overall incredible, but it does suffer from the rage generation. It's not as fluid as Mountain Thane. It tends to be a little bit more like stop go, and it doesn't provide a consistent value. You have that Demolish cooldown, that when that comes up, huge damage, and then you kind of do nothing until it's up again. But overall, I do think it's really good. If you're looking for like a high damage tank that is still, they still have that warrior brick wall, so it's not more vulnerable than the other one. So I'm going to put Colossus in A tier. I don't think it's quite S yet. First of all, I want to talk about these ratings real quick. S tier is like incredibly strong. A tier is, high end, not quite OP, but very high end. B is above average. C is mid, and then D is like it needs a lot of help. So following the Warrior, let's talk about Mountain Thane. Mountain Thane is awesome. It's my favorite hero tree out of the two. There's a really great loop that you're thunderclapping, you're proccing free shield slams, you're getting rage generations. Everything seems to flow really, really well, and it's passive. You know, it's pretty much completely passive, but it's noticeable, which is a nice balance between the passivity of it, where you feel like you're not doing anything different from your rotation, but your rotation is changing with Thunder Blast and stuff like that. So every pull, you're getting consistent value out of this tree. You also get Avatar that's coming off of cooldown very, very quickly. And you also get demo shouts that come off cooldown very, very quickly. So you have this balance of CDs coming off, which demo shout's a great rage generator as well as a damage reduction. Avatar does great damage when you're in it, and you can be in it quite often. Now, it's like I said, it's very consistent, and it has a very high damage output for AoE. It's really, really strong in packs, and it feels really good to play. So I'm going to put this one, I'm actually going to put, I think it's better than A. I'll put it in S tier. I think it's S right now. There's not a lot of things that, like the normal faults that warriors deal with, as far as magic damage, rot damage, anything like that. We don't see a ton of it in season 1. So warriors' biggest weakness isn't as like spotlighted, you know? So they can survive every pack very easily. They scale well. Mountain Thane scales well. So it has kind of all the strengths of warriors, and this season doesn't really hit all the weaknesses. So warriors are very strong right now. It's actually one of my it's my favorite tank when I started playing, and I really enjoy the gameplay of it. So I'm happy to see that warrior is getting some love, is getting some respect, is getting its flowers. And a lot of this also comes from the recent buff they got. Every tank kind of got like a 15% buff, but warriors for some reason got like 30% on their devastator. They got bigger buffs than I think the rest of the tanks did. So it feels really good to play right now. Definitely an S tier option. High A, low S, I think is kind of where I'm going to put it, but it's definitely really good. All right, let's talk about the opposite side of the spectrum now. Prop Paladin. Prop Paladin was my favorite tank in Dragonflight. I felt like I had so much control over pulls. I had so much utility. I could save healers, I could save players, I could save myself. And now it doesn't. So it's much weaker than the Dragonflight version. Part of that is the self-healing. Self-healing's kind of been nerfed a little bit across all tanks, but Pallies were already in a bad spot and then got hit with those nerfs as well. So for example, their self-healing's abysmal with Word of Glory. And that's a problem with attack power scaling versus stamina scaling. They gave us a ton more stamina, but they didn't scale our attack power equally with it, or, you know, whatever. They didn't scale Word of Glory with our stamina. So Word of Glory does kind of beans for healing. Unless you're very low. If you're really low on health, it is kind of a life-saving heal. It'll heal you for like 3 or 4 million. But like as like a general rotation heal, or like something to kind of just keep you topped up, it's fairly weak. Overall, they're really squishy. They got some nerfs to like their key defensive components, shortened defensive usage. Shield of the Avatar is weaker. Consecrate is better because of the changes. Well, the Consecrate change is good, where you can move out of it and you still have it for 4 seconds, but Consecrate is worse. So it's like, now we can move with it, but it's not as good as it used to be. I do think that they are very, very close to being a top tier tank. Because their utility is unmatched, picks are incredible right now. Like silences are so highly valued that their ability to lock down packs with Divine Toll, Avenger Shield, things like that is so good that I think that if they were equally matched with other tanks, they would blow all of them out of the water, just because of their utility. So I think there are a couple defensive tuning knobs from being one of the top tanks. But for now, they're feeling really weak. Now let's talk about the hero talents. Lightsmith is actually the one I like more. I think a lot of people don't really like it. It was originally pretty strong, and apparently it got nerfed. So like the proc rate dropped, or I'm not sure exactly what happened, but it just felt weaker all of a sudden. It's completely passive except for the fact that you have an added button. Now the added button is something you kind of just hit on cooldown, but it does take a little proactiveness to use it well. For example, it's 2 different abilities that rotate when you use them. So if you're going into a pack and you want to shield the healer, but you have the weapon one up, you know, you kind of just need to hit that weapon one and then hit the healing one right afterwards if you have them both like synced. So it does take a little proactiveness to make sure like, okay, we got a big pull coming up. I am going to want this damage and I'm going to want the shield, so I might save mine, or I'm going to want the shield the healer, so I'm going to get through my weapon and save my shield. So there's a little proactiveness to it that is kind of like unnecessarily complicated. Not complicated, but it's just something you have to deal with and think about sometimes. And the value from it isn't worth that, honestly, not anymore. I think they nerfed the sacred weapon a little bit in that nerf, but their utility is really good. That's a Pally thing. We're talking about Lightsmith. So Lightsmith was originally pretty strong, got a little nerfed, completely passive, but has an added button that takes a little bit of thinking to get good use out of it, and you need to be proactive with it. So I think they just like, it's the value from the hero talent isn't very good. So I'm gonna put Lightsmith down in D. Moving off of that, let's go into Templar. I think Templar is probably going to end up in the same spot. It feels clunky. It doesn't feel like it was intended for prot. It feels like it's a very much a ret tree. And you also need Eye of Tyr, which one of the good parts of Pally was being able to be kind of flexible with your trees in order to play certain dungeons, some that needed spell warding, some that needed this, that, the other thing. And needing Eye of Tyr limits your build design, your build options. So I think that's a huge downfall in it. And I don't think any hero tree should be reliant on a talent. But other than that, it doesn't feel very fun to play. You have to hit Eye of Tyr on cooldown, which you're kind of doing anyways, but it feels like when you have like a single target mob or something's about to die, you know, you don't really want to use it because you want to save that defensive aspect of it, but it does good damage. It does heal you for a good chunk, so you might end up using it as like a heal instead of getting that proper defensive use out of it. If you're fighting something, it's getting low, it's about to die, but you're getting low and about to die, you might use it. It just doesn't feel smooth, and it's not really that fun to play. I think the animation was cooler in the beginning of beta when that big hammer came down, and they pulled that back. So it's visually, it's not that exciting, and it's just not overall, just nothing great. But we are going to put that in D as well. It's unfortunate because I really like Pally's. I'm hoping Lightsmith gets a little bit of a buff. I think it was better of the 2, but still, it's not jumping it up in any way. All right, let's talk a little bit about Druid. Druid's actually been really fun to play. It's a very simple class. There's not many things to work through. It hasn't changed too much from Dragonflight. One of the probably bigger changes is Ursoc's Fury isn't nearly as good as it was in Dragonflight. In Dragonflight, when you had Incarn up, you felt like you were just invincible. You know, you just couldn't be killed, spamming raise, getting that shield, all that stuff. Not the case anymore. Incarn still makes you very strong, but you're not immortal anymore like you were in Dragonflight. It also brings Mark of the Wild, so that's a huge aspect of Druid as well. And with the other Druid specs not being as good, that makes a better case for Guardian Druid. So let's go into the hero talents. Elun's Chosen is probably the preferred hero talent, I think, across most Guardian Druids. It's very Moonfire spammy, and it did get some big nerfs to its self-healing, as well as some nerfs to the Moonfire damage and things like that. But one of the plus sides is it's very simple to play. You only have Mangle, Thrash, Ironfur, and Moonfire pretty much, and then you Lunar Beam pretty often. Lunar Beam has like a minute CD, I think it is, but it's reduced by your Thrash and your Moonfire, and because you don't have a lot of abilities to rotate through, you're consistently hitting those. So there's plenty of times where we have a big pack pull, and I can get Lunar Beam 2, maybe 3 times in that pack pull. So that's a huge feature of it. One of the things that's the downfall of not having those other abilities you had in Dragonflight, like Raise and stuff like that, when you're going full Lunar Bear, is your threat generation isn't great on pull. You tend to deal with some, if you have like a Fury Warrior or any DPS class that has a lot of high upfront damage, you can find yourself kind of scrambling a little bit. because you're trying to just Moonfire, Thrash, and then if you're really scraping it, you're swiping just for the threat generation. So that's a big issue that I've noticed, is you do need some time to gather. But once you're gathered and you have people in your Lunar Beam, it's really, really strong. It scales really well with bigger packs. The more packs you have in your Lunar Beam, the more you're healing. You're just doing a ton of damage to all these mobs. Your Galactic Guardian is just triggering and passively hitting Moonfire on a bunch of different things. Plus you're casting Moonfire, so you can be rotating that through your pack. So it's a very strong AoE hero tree. However, it does suffer in single target. It's not nearly as strong as Druid of the Claw in single target. Again, because of that lack of abilities. You only have a handful of abilities you're doing, and when you have that, it's great in AoE, but it's not so great in single target. Also, it's probably one of the more, I said it's simple, it's easy to play, but it's also probably one of the more boring tanks. Like I said, you only have a couple different buttons, and it can feel like when I go from Brewmaster to Druid, I feel like I'm like, I can relax. It's like a payphone class. I can breathe for a little bit, and then halfway through the dungeon, I'm like, okay, I wish I was doing some more stuff. So depending on if you're a beginner tank, this is probably one of the best tanks to play because of how strong it is and because of how easy it is to play. So I'm gonna put Elun's Chosen up in A tier. I don't think it's quite S tier, but I think it's going to be I would say it's a meta pick for an average player. I would say that it's a very, very strong for a beginner player, and very, very strong for the advanced player as well. So anybody who's just pushing like 10 keys, they just want to do their weekly 10s, this is going to be probably like a meta pick for them. They're very easy to play, very strong. Now on to Druid of the Claw. Druid of the Claw I was really excited for when I first saw it. I thought the idea of cat weaving was going to be like extremely fun, but it's just not worth it as far as like risk versus reward. So you're never really utilizing that aspect of being able to bounce in between cat forms and things like that. So you kind of just sit in bear form, and that's a big part of the hero tree that we're not really using. So that's a little unfortunate. Ravage, this might be a personal thing, but Ravage proccing off of Maul and not Raise makes me, it feels weird to hit my Maul button when it pops up. Now that could that's like very easily just be a me thing, but when I'm playing Druid of the Claw and I'm raising in a pack, I would prefer Ravage to just pop into my raise so I could just hit the same button I'm doing, rather than going to hit Maul, which you never hit in AoE. It feels just a little weird to me. What is nice about Druid of the Claw is Ravage puts a 10% DR on all the targets that it hits, so that all the targets are dealing less damage to you. The downside is it's based off of a proc, so when you're fighting a pack, if you don't get that proc, it feels really bad. If you get it like as soon as you go into the pack, it's nice, but you do have some bad luck sometimes where you don't get a Ravage proc, doesn't put that DR on the targets, and you do feel like you're getting beat up a little bit. It does good damage. It's a great single target. It's a little lower in AoE than Elun's Chosen, but it does do good priority. It does do good single target. It's probably better in raid than it would be in Mythic Plus, but I haven't done a lot of raid testing, so that's not something I can really speak on right now, but it feels like it would be, because of its single target, because of its priority, because of your ability to cat weave, probably more so in raid than in Mythic Plus. It feels like the raid spec you would go for. Whenever I played it, I did feel like survivability left a little bit to be desired, with Ursoc's Fury not being as good as it was in Dragonflight. I kind of felt like I was do or die in a couple situations, whereas Elun's Chosen, as soon as I was set up, I wasn't dying. So Druid of the Claw, I don't think it's quite as bad as Pally right now. I'm gonna put it in C. I don't think it's D. I think it just needs a little love. And then maybe it can jump up to B, but even then I don't see it top in the charts at all. I know that a lot of people will say, oh, it's so much better than Elun's Chosen in damage. Yes, but in keys, you're looking for a little bit of a balance on things. So Elun's Chosen is going to take it at E tier for the Druid hero talents. All right, let's talk about Brewmaster. Now, Brewmaster, coming from Dragonflight, coming from 4 or 5 expansions ago, has felt stronger than it ever has. The bloat has been reduced. There's still a lot of buttons, but the bloat and the clunkiness in your opener has been significantly cut down. You don't have this big setup window where you're trying to do all these different things before you're situated. You kind of just run into the pull. You run in, you might hit explosive keg, but typically you're just running in, you're getting your keg smash, you're getting your fire breath up, and you're just trying to grab some targets, but you're not really, there's not the like a long sequence of things you need to do every pull, which feels really good. Plus, it's probably one of the more healer reliant tanks, but it does soak up healing very, very well. So if you have a high throughput tank or high throughput healer, then it does very, very well with it working in sync with it. Something I mentioned in my most recent Brewmaster video comparing Shadowpan to Master of Harmony. So if you haven't seen that, go check that out. I'll put that over there somewhere in the top here. But other than that, we also got Ox Stance. Ox Stance is a charge you get from using Purifying Brew, that any damage you take that's higher than 60% of your current health gets a increased stagger. So it reduces the damage you take on that upfront damage. And it's very, very good for tank busters. I think Brew, I think it kind of undoubtedly handles tank busters better than any other class, maybe except Warrior, if it's a physical damage that they can kind of just negate a little bit with their block. But they handle tank busters very, very well. And this thing that's kind of new in War Within is that a lot of the dungeons in Season 1, the trash mobs just have tank busters kind of scattered throughout the dungeon. So not needing defensives and not getting caught off guard by getting hit by that and just getting one shot because you were kind of low on health at the time, it does feel really good for Brew. They actually do really good damage as well. Both hero trees do good damage. They have high single target, and it does allow for a lot of skill expression, especially when you start using Blackout combo, because then you can start playing things a little bit more unique to the situation. So let's talk about the hero trees. Master of Harmony. Master of Harmony is a really cool hero tree. I don't want to say I like it more because Shadowpan's been creeping up, man. Shadowpan's been feeling really good recently. But Master of Harmony is a bit min-maxy in the fact that you can get a base value out of it with your 2 Celestial Brews. You can get a base defensive, sustainability from it. You have increased stagger on your Purifying Brews. So you have a couple defensive aspects that you can play kind of just in your normal rotation. But aspect of the Harmony from using Celestial Brew does really, really good damage, especially if you build up some vitality and you have a big pack, because it pulls all the vitality from your AoE damage, stores it, and then you can unleash it on a single target, your priority target, and then it can spread in your AoE pack. So it kind of has, if you're min-maxing it a little bit and watching your vitality, or kind of just know that you have a lot from not casting Celestial Brew for a little bit, it can do very big damage on AoE packs. I did a dungeon a little while ago on stream where I was kind of just popping it, even with no purified chi stacks, just popping it solely for the aspect of Harmony buff, and it did a ton of damage by the end of the dungeon. So it does, if you want to min-max it, you can get a lot of damage out of it. I think it's probably the safer option in lower keys, because you have a little bit of breathing room to build it up. It does have like a bit of a build where you have to generate some purified chi stacks, you get them up nice and high, and then you can use it, and you get that big shield, you get the vitality out of it, and you also have a second one. So you can use it a little bit more freely from pack to pack. And I think that might thrive a little bit more in lower keys where you have a little bit of time to build that up in between packs. You're not pulling so massively, because when you do a big pull, you want to get those stacks up quick so that you can use it. You want to get the vitality up quick and you can use it. And sometimes it feels a little rushed in the higher keys. It does allow for some good skill expression because, like I said, if you're min-maxing vitality and Celestial Brew and all these things like that, you can really work it for how you want to play. It is a bit counterintuitive. You build vitality outside of your aspect of Harmony buff. So when you're in your aspect of Harmony, you don't want to use Weapons of Order, because Weapons of Order, although a very big damage increase, does also increase the vitality you generate. So using them on top of each other isn't really what you want to do. You want to use one outside of the other, not necessarily before or after. But you can build up a lot of vitality with Weapons of Order and then go into Celestial Brew. Or if you have a lot of vitality, you can dump it with Celestial Brew and then go into Weapons of Order and generate it really quickly, but you don't want to overlap them, and that feels not great. So that's the downside to that. But it does, if you have proper usage, it does do big AoE damage because of its spreading to different targets. So it's good single. It's overall it's pretty good single target. It's good AoE. Takes a little bit of leveraging, takes a little bit of min-maxing and awareness, but it does have a high skill ceiling and allows you to express that skill in really cool ways. So I'm gonna put Master of Harmony in A. I think Brew's in a very, very good spot. And I think it's fun. So I'm gonna put that in A. Now let's talk about Shadowpan. Now Shadowpan, I kind of hated at first. The first time I played the class, I was like, this is just kind of boring. It doesn't really do anything. But playing it recently after some changes to the flurry strikes and how they work, it's definitely becoming up there with me. It's very, very close to Master of Harmony. It's completely passive, so you can pretty much talent into it and then never think about it again, which might be the case, which might be what you like. You might want a little bit more control, but it's 100% passive. I know that when you generate flurry strikes, you can track your energy to see when it's going to come out, but you don't really play any differently. If flurry strikes is about to come out, you don't stop spenders, you don't do anything like that. So it's kind of a not really a useful thing to track. You just kind of know when it's coming rather than not knowing when it's coming, but it's coming regardless. So it does have a pretty much like a permanent 10% damage reduction, which unlike Druid of the Claw that you have to have that proc go off, this you just have to dodge or parry, which you're going to do almost immediately in every pull. So as soon as that dodge or parry comes up, you have 10% DR and you are not dropping it. And I did notice this when I was doing some keys that like the initial startup to a big pull felt a little bit better than Master of Harmony because you just had that damage reduction off rip. You didn't have to build up your chi stacks to get Celestial Brew going or anything like that. It was just immediate. I think the visuals for flurry strikes are a bit weak. I think the sound effect is extremely cool, but the visual just looks like Fist of Fury, and I wish like you spawned a couple of things next to you and they all just kind of hit. Like I think that'd be really cool. It's probably more of a Master of Harmony style buff or style animation, but the flurry strikes animation doesn't really do much for me. It's not a super interesting hero tree as far as what you can do or what it does, the feel behind it. But what I do like is it leans into core mechanics. So your rotation doesn't change, but your rotation as a whole becomes better in this hero tree. It's like I said, it kind of leans in. It's like almost like Mountain Thane, where it's passive but noticeable. That stuff feels a little bit stronger. Lastly, it reduces the cooldown on Weapons of Order. It's like every 50 energy you spend reduces it by 1 second, and you kind of blast through energy really quickly. So Weapons of Order comes off cooldown a lot quicker, and that feels really good too. You get a lot more uptime out of it. So overall, I think I'm gonna put Shadowpan in A as well. Shadowpan has felt as good, slightly better in some situations, slightly worse in other situations. I do like Master of Harmony a little bit more, but I think that's for personal reasons, not necessarily because it's better. So they're pretty neck and neck. I'm putting them both in A tier. Let's go on to Death Knight. Now, Death Knight at the start of the beta, actually, let's talk about some of the changes and how it feels as a whole as a tank itself. It is a little bit more bloated, especially on the pull. You have a lot of things to be setting up going into the pull. You got Death and Decay, you've got Dancing Rune Weapon, you've got Bone Storm, you've got Consumption, you've got all these different things that you can work into your opener. That does feel like you're playing piano a little bit, but once you're in and stable, it becomes a lot simpler. It's a very stable tank. It's probably the best tank for pugging because you're not reliant so much on the healer. You do have a lot of control over your own health and your own destiny, if you will. So if you're a pug tank, then I think Death Knight's a great tank to be playing because of that. Great for raid, as always. It's always really good for raid because of its self-sustain. You do need to manage bone shields pretty heavily because you have a lot of stuff like Tombstone and Bone Storm that are taking away bone shield charges. So you have a little bit of resource management. Not necessarily like you're going to run out of resources, because it seems to be pretty strong and pretty consistent with like runic power and rune generation. but more Bone Shield, you know, being aware that you're not going to nuke yourself by using Bone Storm. Still feels really self-reliant, even with the nerfs they got to Death Strike and the Death Strike shield, the Blood Shield, and it still feels really good. Even though you can't generate a full health bar of shield, it's down to 50%, which is a huge cut, and you probably feel that a little bit, but overall it still feels pretty strong. They changed Death Strike so that it only heals you for damage taken in the last 5 seconds. You hit Death Strike, it wipes that damage away, and then it's a new set of damage, which if you're taking a lot of damage doesn't really matter, because I've noticed that in like bigger pulls, as soon as I Death Strike, it's right back to being a very strong Death Strike. So you don't necessarily need to wait that 5 seconds. You can usually get away with doing one Death Strike every 2 or 3 seconds because of how much damage you're taking. Now, following that, damage intake does need to be relatively high for Death Strike to be valuable. Whereas before you could spam it and you could get a bunch of heals off of one like set of damage. Now you don't have that. So if you're low health and low damage or low damage intake, then it's a lot harder to climb out of that hole. So they have become a little healer reliant in those situations. But outside of that, there's still the blood DK that I think everybody knows and loves. Okay, let's talk about their hero talents. Sand Lane at the start was like clearly the winner. At the start of the beta, everybody loved Sand Lane. It did have some funky setups to get into it, with vampiric blood being like your main focus and doing these different things, and then just spamming vampiric strike over and over and over and over. And it did put really good damage out, and still does with big AoE, but it's outside of big AoE, it's not as strong. It feels a little bit weaker. It's a little buggy. It's a little RNG based, and a little bit awkward to play, but it's more interactive than Deathbringer, as you get to kind of, you know, create these pulls, these builds, these ramping situations before you're just blasting and stuff. And Blood Beast is something you can get in Vampiric Blood, and that thing is so good. But overall, it's kind of just it's not bad. I don't think it's bad, but I don't think it's anything that's I don't think it's what it was when it first came out and everybody was really hyping it up. So I'm gonna put it down in B tier, mainly because Death Knight as a whole is still so good that this doesn't really, like, if it was just a hero talent purely, it'd probably be lower, but because of how good Death Knight is, I think it kind of gets that mid-tier range. All right, let's talk about Deathbringer. Deathbringer is the go-to now. Now that we've played for a little bit, it's the go-to for Mythic Plus. It's got a really sick animation. Whenever you're using Exterminate after your Death Mark, I think it's called, or a Reaper's Mark, whatever it may be, I forget the name offhand. But when you Exterminate, you have big scythes that slice through things, and it looks really cool. It's fairly simple to play because it's kind of just your DK rotation plus Reaper's Mark. I'm gonna say it's Reaper's Mark. It's kind of just your normal rotation plus that every 45 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever the cooldown is of it. And you do have consistent damage with these little burst windows through it. It just feels overall like very strong, very fun to play. It's got, like I said, the animations are kind of a big thing for me, because when you play these new hero talents, you want something cool. You want to see it in action. I know that Deathbringer also does, it creates a little frost mechanic to your blood boil, where it creates like a frost cloud around you. It changes the feel of Blood Death Knight in a noticeable way, that when you're playing it, it just feels good, it looks cool, and I think overall it's just a great hero tree. So we're gonna put this one, because of how good Death Knight is and how this just kind of notches it up a little better in visuals and burst damage and things like that. We're gonna go in S tier. I think that's a safe bet. I think everybody's gonna agree that Death Knight in general should be in S tier. I just don't think Sand Lane is an S tier hero talent, but I think that this matches really well with the Death Knight play. Doesn't overcomplicate things. Sand Lane, like I said, has like this burst window where you need to set up a bunch of stuff, and you know, Blood Boil, Death Strike, Vampiric Blood, spam, and you know, it's just like a more bloat to your opener, which just makes it worse to play. Whereas Deathbringer just feels like upside. It just feels like you go into your normal rotation, and then when you're done, you pop this mark on the target. It starts taking damage to everything around it. It explodes. It does damage to everything around it. You get exterminate. You get these big sites. Like, it's just overall a good balance between hero tree and class. Lastly, we've got the defending champion of Dragonflight. We have Demon Hunter, Vengeance Demon Hunter. Now, apparently, Vengeance Demon Hunter had more people get their title with it than any other class ever. So, hey, cheers to Vengeance Demon Hunters. Cheers to people utilizing it and getting that title. Good job. But all right, changes from Dragonflight to War Within. They lost their illuminated sigils. They didn't lose the talent, but they lost the reason to take it. So a lot of people don't take it really anymore. Their utility isn't nearly as good. It's actually fairly weak now, because it has mostly stops. Like, it has a ton of different stops, but with how they design dungeons in the War Within, stops are far less valuable than they were before. They're still a little squishy, and they have a little bit of lower uptime and lower resource generation. So let's go into Eldrazi Reaver first. It's interesting to play. It's not super exciting as a hero talent, but it isn't like, it's not bad, but it's not great, you know. And there is a bug that is currently making it stronger than it is, that allows for a lot of self-healing, which when it gets fixed, I think it might drop this down another notch. But like I said, it feels good. It just doesn't feel complete. And, you know, I'm not a big Demon Hunter player. I played a lot off stream when they got their initial buffs, because I was like, this class is going to be good. You know, I want to play this. So I was playing it a lot, and Eldrazi Reaver always felt kind of weird and just like not what I was looking for in Mythic Plus. In single target, I think it felt really good, but from pull to pull, it felt like it was missing something. So we're going to put that down in C tier. Now Fellscarred. Fellscarred, I actually thoroughly enjoyed playing. I really like that it's a meta focused hero tree. That's your biggest cooldown. So focusing the hero tree on your biggest cooldown felt like a good synergy. It does allow for a higher meta uptime, which is great. And it does have Demon Surge, which when you go into meta, you have all these different abilities that change. And when you cast them, they cast a Demon Surge and it explodes. So they have really, really good burst damage in their metamorphosis window. That's kind of unmatched, I think, by any other tank. As soon as you get like a big pull and you just rotate through 4, 5, 6 abilities that all explode, it does a ton of damage. One good and bad thing is it does kind of turn meta into a more offensive ability, rather than purely like a defensive, like you have a big pull, you pop meta to stay alive. Now you have a pull, you pop meta to deal damage. And that can feel really bad if you know you're going to need meta within the cooldown time of it. So if you do a pull and you're like, you know, I could really, really love to do the damage here, do big damage, but I'm going to need meta 2 pulls down the line. I know I'm going to need meta to survive. So maybe I don't use it here. And that makes it feel worse. Plus, to get max damage out of that burst window, you need to use Fiery Brand and kind of dump almost all your cooldowns into it, which again doesn't feel good because you're dumping cooldowns in for you're dumping defensive cooldowns to improve your offensive ability. And if you kind of just want to have those for the next pack or something like that, it can just feel a little like you're playing against the grain. But when you see that big damage, it does feel really, really good. It doesn't really change as far as visuals. You're still kind of playing the same thing. Granted, Demon Hunter probably has the cooler visuals out of any other tank as like a baseline, but you don't get anything changed with Fellscarred. Now, they did nerf it recently, which was probably warranted. Burning Blades was doing 65% of your damage through melee and through I can't think of the ability, but it was doing 65 damage over time afterwards to all your targets, and it was, you know, top damage in dungeons. It was kind of broken. So what they did was they met in the middle. I think it does 30% now. It used to be 15, then it went to 65 or 60. Now it's at 30. And then they improved Demon Surge. So they reduced the consistency of your damage and put it back into your burst damage. So They still do decent damage, but it's not the same as they were doing before when it was just like a head and shoulders above the rest. So for Felsguard, I like Felsguard. I do like having the big damage in meta, but I am aware that it does hurt to have a defensive ability become so offensive. So we're gonna put that in B tier. So there we go. That is my end of list beta. I think that Monk over here, looking at this list, I think one of these could be here. But I think depending on what you like more, could be Master of Harmony, could be Shadowpan. So these are kind of interchangeable. I think Pally is the clear loser going into War Within, unfortunately, but because they're so close to being able to be buffed up and be a top tier tank, I think that they're in a bad spot, but potentially a very good spot. But yeah, this is pretty much the tier list for it. Warriors are feeling really good, which I'm happy about. I love playing Warriors. Death Knight's feeling really good. So if you're a Death Knight player, you're probably happy right now. And then you can't go wrong with Guardian, Bear, Loon's Chosen. Can't go wrong with either of the Monk hero trees. And then Demon Hunter, I think it's still very playable just from Chaos brand, but it's just as a tank itself, I think it's a little weaker than the other ones. So there you go. That is the final tier list for the beta. See you later, guys.